In the spring of 1992, a quiet 29-year-old woman walked into a Phoenix County office to renew her identification card. Minutes later, a red flag flashed on the clerk's screen. Detectives arrived with fingerprint equipment and a case file from 1969. The woman waiting calmly had no idea she was closing a 23-year mystery. How does a child vanish in daylight and live for decades without knowing her own name? This is the story of a daughter who came home and a mother who never stopped waiting. Willow Creek, Nebraska in 1969 was the kind of place most Americans remember when they think about small-town life before everything changed. Barely 7,000 souls lived there, scattered across flat prairie land where the grain elevator stood as the tallest structure for 50 miles in any direction. The single main street had diagonal parking and storefronts that hadn't changed facades since the 1940s. Everyone attended the same county fair, every August without fail. The Harper family lived in a modest yellow house on Elm Street. David Harper ran the local feed store on Main Street, a steady and reliable man who wore work boots, even to church, and had gentle eyes and strong hands from lifting feed bags day after day. His wife, Margaret, worked part-time at the library and helped organize town events. She was known for her warm smile and her uncanny ability to remember what books each patron enjoyed. Her auburn hair, which she wore, pulled back in a practical style she'd passed on to both her daughters. Claire was 10 years old that summer, already showing signs of being the responsible one in the family. She was serious and protective, with freckles scattered across her nose and darker hair than her little sister. She loved school, and had already announced she wanted to be a teacher when she grew up. And then there was Lily, 6 years old, tiny for her age, all curls and boundless energy. Her gap-toothed smile, courtesy of a missing front tooth, lit up every room she entered. She loved vanilla ice cream cones more than anything else in the world and insisted on wearing her blue sandals everywhere, even to bed sometimes. She carried a worn teddy bear named Sunny with her constantly, and she asked endless questions about everything she saw. Why does the sky do that? How come birds know where to go? What's that bug called? Her laugh carried across the yard when she played the kind of bright, unself-conscious joy that makes adults smile without realizing it. Sunday dinners at the Harper table were sacred time. David would ask each girl about their week while Margaret served pot roast and potatoes. Claire would help Lily cut her meat into smaller pieces, and everyone contributed to the conversation in turn. David had a phrase he used often, looking at his wife and daughters with quiet satisfaction. "Harpers stick together," he'd say. Margaret's bedtime routine never varied either. She'd tuck each girl in, smoothing the covers and whispering "sweet dreams, sweetheart" in the same gentle tone, first to Claire, then to Lily. On August 22nd, 1969, the Harper family drove to the county fair together in David's Ford pickup truck, all four of them laughing about something Claire had said. Margaret had packed sandwiches in a cooler. Claire brought her prize money from the week before, earned doing chores for neighbors. Lily wore her beloved blue sandals and clutched Sunny the bear in her lap. It was supposed to be a perfect summer evening, the kind of memory families treasure for lifetimes. By nightfall, they would be 3 instead of 4, and that number would remain unchanged for 23 years. The morning of the fair started early in the Harper house. At 6:30, Lily padded into her parents' bedroom, still in her nightgown, Sunny tucked under one arm. She climbed into the bed between them, bouncing slightly. "Is it fair day? Is it fair day?" she asked, her voice high with excitement. David mock groaned and pulled a pillow over his face, while Margaret laughed and pulled her youngest daughter close. By 7 o'clock, the family gathered around the breakfast table. Lily had already put on her blue sandals, even though Margaret told her to take them off while eating. Pancakes with maple syrup covered the plates, and Lily peppered her father with questions between bites. "Will there be a Ferris wheel this year? Can I ride it? How high does it go up? Can I see our house from the top?" Claire rolled her eyes at her sister's enthusiasm but smiled despite herself. Margaret reached over and smoothed Lily's curls. "We'll see, sweetie. Eat your breakfast." When Lily asked if she could bring Sunny to the fair, Margaret hesitated only a moment before nodding. "You have to keep track of him, though," she said, looking her daughter in the eye. "He's your responsibility, all right." Lily nodded with the utmost seriousness, hugging the teddy bear close to her chest. "I won't let go, Mama. I promise." David spent the morning at the feed store, working a half day like most Saturdays. Customers came in for last-minute supplies before heading to the fair, and everyone talked about what time they planned to arrive, which booths they wanted to visit, whether the weather would hold. David joked with the regulars, telling them to save him a burger at the volunteer fire department stand where he'd be helping out that afternoon. He closed up at noon, sharp, unusual for a Saturday, but the fair was important. By 2:15, David had headed off to the volunteer fire department's burger stand to start his shift. Margaret found a good spot under a shade tree near the main pavilion and spread out their picnic blanket. The location was perfect, with a clear view of the game booths and close enough to everything important. Claire asked if she could go off with her friends, and Margaret glanced at her watch. "Be back by 5 o'clock, she said, and Claire promised she would before running off toward the ring toss games. Lily played near the blanket for the next 2 hours, never straying far from where Margaret had settled. Another family had set up nearby, and soon Lily was chasing Bubbles with 2 other children around her age. Their giggles carried across the grass. Margaret sat with a group of other mothers, all of them chatting about upcoming school schedules, library events, whose garden was producing the best tomatoes this year. Every minute or so, Margaret would glance over at Lily, that automatic check every mother makes without consciously thinking about it. Blue dress, curly hair right there, playing. Blue dress, curly hair right there, laughing. That periodic confirmation of safety became as natural as breathing. Around 4:30 in the afternoon, everything was completely terrifyingly ordinary. The fair hummed with activity all around them. Families wandered between booths, children shrieked with delight on the rides, vendors called out their wares. The sun hung lower in the sky, but still blazed hot. Lily was approximately 15 feet from the blanket, chasing those bubbles another child's mother was blowing from a small plastic wand. She'd set Sunny down on the blanket earlier, and the bear sat propped against the cooler, keeping watch. Margaret could see her daughter clearly, could hear her giggling. Other mothers later confirmed it in their statements. Lily was right there, visible, safe, surrounded by people. Nothing looked unusual. No strangers had approached. No odd conversations had occurred. Everything was as normal as a summer fair afternoon could possibly be. What happened next would haunt Margaret Harper for the rest of her life. A friend named Alice Morrison, sitting on the blanket beside her, asked about the library's upcoming book drive. Margaret turned her head to answer, shifting her body slightly to face Alice while they talked. The conversation was brief, maybe 45 seconds at most. Just 2 friends discussing a community event in lowered voices so as not to disturb the others. When Margaret turned back, her eyes automatically scanning for that blue dress and those auburn curls, Lily wasn't there. "Lily," Margaret called out, her voice still casual. "Lily, honey." She stood up slowly, scanning the immediate area. The other children were still playing, but not her daughter. "Lily." Her voice rose slightly, taking on an edge. Other mothers looked up from their conversations. Margaret walked quickly around the nearby trees, checked behind the game booths closest to them. Her heart started beating faster. "Lily." Now, other people were helping, calling out the name. Someone ran to get David from the burger stand. Margaret checked the bathrooms, both the women's, and then asking a stranger to check the men's. She went to the food stands, particularly the ice cream vendor, because that was Lily's favorite. 5 minutes passed, then 10. David arrived, running his apron still on and smelling of grilled meat. "Where? When? How long?" he demanded, and Margaret could barely answer through the panic rising in her throat. Fair security was notified. Volunteers began forming spontaneous search lines, checking under tables and behind booths. The Ferris wheel operator stopped the ride completely so they could look carefully at every car, making sure no little girl was somehow stuck or hiding there. People checked the animal pens in the livestock barns, calling Lily's name over and over. Everyone asked everyone else the same desperate question. "Have you seen a little girl? Blue dress with white dots, curly red hair, about this tall." People shook their heads. So many children were at the fair that afternoon. No one had noticed one particular child, even one as distinctive as Lily Harper. At 5:12 in the afternoon, approximately 25 minutes after Lily had vanished, the fair security office called the county sheriff. Margaret was too hysterical to speak clearly by then. David took the phone, his hands shaking, trying desperately to stay calm and failing. "My daughter, she's 6 years old. She's missing auburn hair, blue dress. Please hurry, please." By the time the first sheriff's car pulled into the fairgrounds, Lily Harper had been missing for 27 minutes. The search dogs would arrive an hour later and pick up her scent near the family blanket, trail it across the grass toward the gravel parking lot, and then lose it completely, as if she'd been lifted into the air or placed into a vehicle. By nightfall, those minutes would become hours. By morning, the hours would become days. And the days would stretch into 23 years of not knowing, not seeing, not holding. 23 years of Margaret Harper whispering goodnight to an empty bedroom the same words every single night without fail. 23 years of a teddy bear named Sunny, sitting on an unmade bed waiting patiently for a little girl who would grow into a woman believing she was someone else entirely, living a completely different life under a completely different name, with no memory of the yellow house on Elm Street, or the family who never stopped searching. Deputy Tom Mercer arrived first from local patrol at 5:45 that evening. He immediately radioed for backup, understanding within minutes that this wasn't a child who'd simply wandered off to look at ponies. The sheriff's department dispatched 6 additional deputies within the hour. They established a command post at the fairgrounds' main office, spreading out maps and beginning to organize the chaos of volunteers into something more systematic. Initially, they didn't shut down the fair itself, still hoping Lily had just gotten lost in the crowd and would turn up confused but safe. By 6:30, though, they'd formed proper search parties. Fair security worked alongside sheriff's deputies to divide the volunteers into teams. Approximately 150 people participated in those first organized searches. Each team assigned a specific section of the fairgrounds to cover methodically. At 7:15, Sergeant Ray Harlan arrived and took command of the scene. He was a veteran investigator in his late 40s, someone who'd worked dozens of missing person cases over his career. He knew immediately how critical these first hours were. He interviewed Margaret and David separately, standard procedure that made Margaret cry harder because it felt like they were being suspected. He got the description, studied the small wallet photos they carried, and immediately put out alerts to all surrounding counties. Be on the lookout for a 6-year-old female, approximately 40 pounds, 3 feet, 9 inches tall, curly auburn hair, freckles across the nose, missing front tooth. Last seen wearing a blue dress with white polka dots and blue sandals. By 8 o'clock, the canine units had arrived from State Patrol. 2 bloodhounds were given Lily's nightgown from the car, something Margaret had packed, thinking they might stay late. The dogs immediately picked up the scent from the picnic blanket and began pulling their handlers across the grass with purpose. Everyone's hopes lifted for a moment. The dogs know something. The dogs will find her. But the trail led toward the parking lot and simply stopped on the gravel. Scent doesn't hold well on gravel or asphalt, and the handlers exchanged grim looks. Their professional opinion delivered quietly to Sergeant Harlan confirmed everyone's worst fear. The scent pattern indicated Lily had been picked up at that location and placed into a vehicle. Direction unknown. The parking lot had 2 exits. She could be anywhere by now. Search helicopters arrived. As darkness fell, their powerful searchlights sweeping across the surrounding fields, while volunteers on the ground carried flashlights and called Lily's name into the growing darkness. Every building on the fairgrounds was searched thoroughly. Barns, shed storage areas, vendor trucks. Portable lights were set up to continue the search through the night. By 10 o'clock, more than 200 volunteers were involved. Every available law enforcement officer in the county had been called in from their days off. Volunteer fire departments from 3 neighboring towns responded to help. All the fair staff and vendors stayed rather than going home, everyone wanting to do something, anything to help find this little girl. That first night, they searched the entire 40-acre fairground 3 separate times. They expanded into the surrounding cornfields, walking carefully through rows within a 1-mile radius of where Lily had last been seen. They checked highway ditches in both directions, searched nearby creek beds, investigated every abandoned building within a 5-mile radius. Every single vehicle still in the parking lot was checked before owners were allowed to leave. Though by that point, whoever had taken Lily was long gone. The only thing they found was Sunny the bear, still propped against the cooler on the picnic blanket, his button eyes seeming to ask where his girl had gone. The Harper family sat in their living room that night under harsh, fluorescent lights that made everything look even worse than it was. Neighbors kept arriving with coffee that no one drank and casseroles that would sit untouched in the refrigerator. Margaret clutched Sonny returned from being processed as evidence, holding him the way Lily would have held him, rocking slightly. David stared at his hands, opening and closing them as if he couldn't understand why they were empty, why he couldn't fix this. Claire huddled on the couch, silent and shocked, listening to the adults talk in urgent, frightened voices. Sergeant Harlan sat across from them, his hat in his hands, his voice quiet but determined. "We're doing everything we can," he promised. "Roadblocks are up on all major routes. We've got alerts out to neighboring counties and states. I need you to tell me everything about today, every single detail about Lily, anything that might help us find her." They talked until exhaustion made the words blur together. Lily's routines, her favorite things, the names of her friends, whether any new people had moved to town recently, if anyone had acted strangely around the children. But nothing stood out. No warning signs, no suspicious characters. Just a little girl who'd vanished in the middle of a crowded fair, surrounded by people who cared, disappearing as completely as if the earth had opened up and swallowed her whole. The first days after Lily vanished were frantic with desperate hope. The tip line established by the sheriff's department flooded with calls ringing constantly day and night. Volunteers who'd searched all night went home to sleep for a few hours and then returned to search again. Helicopters buzzed overhead during daylight hours, their presence a constant reminder of the emergency unfolding. Lily's photo appeared on every local news broadcast. The image they used showed her smiling with that gap-toothed grin taken just a month earlier at a family picnic. Missing Lily Harper, age 6, last seen August 22nd at the county fair. The description was repeated so often it became seared into everyone's memory. Auburn curls, freckles, blue dress, blue sandals, 40 pounds, 3 feet 9 inches tall. The leads poured in throughout that first week. Someone reported seeing a girl matching Lily's description at a truck stop 40 miles away. Deputies raced there to find it had been a different child entirely. A passing motorist called in about a car with out-of-state plates and a child in the back seat who might have been her. They tracked down the vehicle, only to find it was a family traveling through with their own daughter. A rest area attendant 2 states over was certain she'd seen Lily using the bathroom with a woman who seemed nervous. That lead, like all the others, evaporated upon investigation. By the end of the first week, a grim reality had settled over the investigation. Sergeant Harlan returned to the Harper house to deliver an update that felt more like defeat. "We're not quitting," he said, and his eyes showed he meant it. "But the early hours are critical in cases like this, and we're past that window now. We're shifting our strategy to wider searches, checking sex offender registries more thoroughly, sending alerts across state lines. The longer this goes, the tougher it gets." Margaret buried her face in Sonny's worn fur, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. David walked outside into the dark yard, unable to stay in that room another moment. Claire listened from the hallway, feeling the world crack open beneath her feet, sensing that childhood was over and nothing would ever be the same again. The investigation dragged on through the fall of 1969. Sergeant Harlan's team chased every whisper of a lead, no matter how thin. A farmer 20 miles away reported he'd seen a girl matching Lily's description in the back of a rusty pickup truck at a gas station. Deputies found the truck and searched it top to bottom, finding absolutely nothing. The owner was cooperative and clearly confused about why he was being investigated. Another dead end. A woman at a diner in the next county reported a man buying children's clothes and acting nervous when she tried to make conversation. They tracked him down and questioned him for hours, only to discover he had a daughter of his own and was simply shy around strangers. False alarm after false alarm, each one raising hopes before crushing them again. By winter, the fairground searches had ended. There was nowhere left to look there. The tip line grew quieter, the calls dropping from dozens per day to just a handful per week. Most were from well-meaning psychics claiming to have visions, none of which led anywhere useful. Volunteers gradually returned to their regular lives. They had jobs, families, obligations they couldn't postpone forever. Sergeant Harlan still stopped by the Harper house every few weeks, but his updates grew thinner each time. The file under his arm getting thicker, while the new information grew scarcer. "We're running national alerts now," he'd explain, sitting at their kitchen table with coffee growing cold in front of him. We're checking every adoption record we can access, every hospital admission involving a child with red hair in the approximate age range. We're not closing this case. We won't give up. But the truth was settling in like frost on the Nebraska prairie, cold and inevitable. The golden window for finding Lily alive had closed. No ransom note had ever arrived. Nobody had turned up with information that led anywhere. Lily Harper had simply evaporated into the summer air, and with each passing day the chances of finding her decreased exponentially. Margaret kept Lily's room exactly as it had been that last morning. The bed remained unmade sheets, still rumpled from where Lily had climbed out excitedly to start fair day. The blue sandals, a spare pair from home, sat by the door where Lily always left them. Sonny the bear, returned after being processed as evidence, sat on the pillow where he belonged. The crayon drawings Lily had made were still taped to the walls, their colors bright and innocent. Every night Margaret stood in that doorway, one hand on the frame, and whispered into the darkness, "Good night, sweetheart. Come home soon." Every morning she woke with the same hollow ache in her chest. David buried himself in the feed store, working from dawn until well past dusk, so he wouldn't have to face the empty chair at the dinner table. He couldn't talk about Lily without his voice breaking, so he stopped talking about her at all, which somehow felt even worse. The silence around her name grew louder than any shouting could have been. Claire, now 10 going on 30, stopped mentioning her little sister in front of her parents. She carried her guilt quietly, a weight that grew heavier with each passing month. She'd been supposed to watch Lily that day, hadn't she? She was the big sister. She should have stayed closer. These thoughts circled endlessly in her mind, and though her parents told her it wasn't her fault, their voices were so empty that the words carried no real comfort. The family began to fracture under the weight of grief too heavy for any marriage to bear. Arguments flared over small things. Who forgot to pay the electric bill? Why the lawn hadn't been mowed? Why there was no milk in the refrigerator? They never fought about Lily directly because that hurt too much, but every argument was about Lily anyway. Her absence filled the house like a presence, pushing them all to the edges of their own lives. In 1972, 3 years after that August afternoon, Sergeant Harlan retired from the sheriff's department. He came to the Harper house one final time, hat literally in hand, apology written in every line of his weathered face. "I wish I had better news to give you," he said simply. "If she's out there somewhere, there's a good chance she might not even know who she really is anymore." "Not after this long." Margaret nodded numbly. David shook the sergeant's hand and thanked him for trying. Neither of them had tears left to cry. The case was passed to a younger detective named Sarah Klenn. She read through the thick file, with fresh eyes stared at the photos of the gap-toothed girl with auburn curls, and promised herself she'd check in regularly on this case, that she wouldn't let Lily Harper be forgotten. But new cases piled up on her desk week after week, and gradually, inevitably, Lily's folder slid deeper into the filing cabinet, buried under more recent tragedies that demanded immediate attention. By the mid-1970s, Willow Creek had moved on in the way communities do when they have no choice. The annual fair still happened every August, and people attended without thinking about the little girl who'd vanished there anymore. New families moved into town who'd never heard the story. The yellow ribbons that had been tied around trees came down. The Find Lily signs that shop owners had posted in their windows faded in the sun and were quietly removed. Only the old-timers remembered anymore, and even they rarely spoke of it. Occasionally, someone would mention it at the diner over coffee. "Whatever happened to that Harper girl you remember?" The conversation would quiet for a respectful moment, and then someone would change the subject and life would move on. Margaret took a full-time position at the library, needing the structure of a regular schedule to keep herself from falling completely apart. She smiled at patrons' recommended books with genuine enthusiasm and helped organize reading programs for children. But her eyes always looked past people still searching every crowd for a particular face, jumping at every glimpse of auburn hair or blue dress. Every red-haired child who walked through the library doors made her heart stop for just a moment. David sold the feed store in 1978 and moved to a smaller house outside of town. He couldn't bear it anymore, the daily questions from customers who meant well, but didn't understand that asking any news was like ripping open a wound that never healed. The marriage to Margaret didn't end officially. They never divorced. They simply separated, living apart, because being together meant constantly confronting what they'd lost together. Claire went away to college and then stayed away. Coming home felt like stepping into a museum of grief where everything was preserved exactly as it had been the day her world ended. She called weekly at first, then monthly, then just on holidays. Each visit back to Nebraska felt like drowning. But through all those years, through all that change and distance and slow disintegration of the family they'd once been, Margaret maintained her rituals with unwavering dedication. Every single night she stood in Lily's doorway and whispered the same words. "Good night, sweetheart. Come home soon." The bedroom remained untouched, a shrine to a 6-year-old who would never return. Every August 22nd, Lily's birthday, Margaret baked a vanilla cake. The first year it had 7 candles, then 8, then 9. She wrote "Happy Birthday, Lily" in pink frosting with her own careful hand, lit the candles alone in her kitchen, and whispered the same wish she'd been whispering for years. "Let her be safe. Let her remember us." The cake would sit on the counter for days untouched, until David would stop by and quietly throw it away without comment. Every Christmas, Margaret bought a present for Lily, age-appropriate gifts that changed as the years passed. Books for teenagers, young adult novels, pretty scarves. Each one was carefully wrapped and placed in the closet, with all the others a growing pile of unopened gifts, marking the passage of time and the birthdays that should have been celebrated. Sonny the bear sat on the bed, his fur growing dusty. The blue sandals remained by the door, their leather cracking with age. The crayon drawings stayed taped to the wall, their colors gradually fading. The growth chart on the doorframe stopped forever at 3 feet 9 inches. In 1984, Lily would have turned 21, a legal adult. Margaret wondered if her daughter was married somewhere, if she'd gone to college, if she was even alive. She bought flowers that day and drove to the cemetery, though there was no grave to visit. She just sat in her car and cried. When Claire got married in 1987, she had a small ceremony in Denver. Margaret attended. David came separately. They didn't sit together during the service, and both of them carefully avoided talking about Lily, though her absence filled the room. Claire mentioned her sister only once during a private moment with her mother. "I wish she was here," she said quietly. Margaret left early, sobbing in her car in the parking lot. 2 years later, when Claire had her first child, a son she named David after his grandfather, Margaret visited once. She held her grandson and felt joy mixed with piercing sadness. Lily should be an aunt, she thought. Lily should be here to meet him. The visit was brief. Margaret couldn't bear to stay long, surrounded by the normal life her other daughter had built, while Lily remained frozen at age 6 in her memory. By the early 1990s, more than 20 years had passed since that August afternoon. Margaret still worked at the library, though she was thinking about retirement. She still whispered goodnight to Lily's empty room every single night. She still baked the birthday cakes every August now, with 28 candles, then 29. David's health had started declining, heart problems that the doctors said were just aging, but Margaret knew were partly from a heart that had been broken and never repaired. They saw each other occasionally at town events, polite and distant, both of them carrying the same grief but unable to share it anymore. Inside were newspaper clippings yellowed with age. Missing Lily Harper 6, vanished from county fair. A photo of a little girl with curly auburn hair, freckles, a gap-toothed smile. A girl who looked eerily like the few childhood photos Ruth had allowed to be taken of Sarah. But the date was August 1969. Ruth had always said Sarah was born in 1970. Sarah read every article with hands that trembled. Family pleads for daughter's return. A photo of a woman named Margaret Harper, eyes hollow with grief, standing in front of a yellow house that Sarah recognized from her dreams. Margaret Harper, librarian. David Harper, feed store owner. Sister Claire, age 10. Willow Creek, Nebraska. And a teddy bear named Sonny. The name hit her like electricity. Sonny. She'd dreamed about that name, hadn't she? Or was she making that up now that she'd read it? Sarah carefully returned everything to the box, locked it, put the key back exactly where she'd found it. She said nothing to Ruth that evening, or the next week, or the next month, but she couldn't sleep anymore. She started doing research at the library where she worked part-time, carefully erasing her computer history after each session. Missing children databases, Old newspaper archives. The pieces fit together too well. She was 22 when she found those clippings. She waited 7 more years before she did anything about it. 7 years of fear and confusion and slowly building certainty. Ruth was aging, becoming less watchful. Sarah had her own car, now her own job, small fragments of independence. But taking that final step, the one that would either confirm her suspicions or prove she was crazy, required more courage than she'd thought she possessed. In the spring of 1992, Sarah's car failed inspection due to an expired registration tag. A police officer pulled her over but was kind about it. Just get it renewed. No ticket this time. But renewal meant an updated identification card, and that meant scrutiny. Sarah sat in her car after the officer left, hands gripping the steering wheel, heart pounding. This was the moment. She could keep living as Sarah Whitaker, keep the questions buried, keep the peace with Ruth. Or she could walk into that government office and see what happened when she tried to prove she was who Ruth said she was. On a morning in late spring, Sarah walked into a county office building in suburban Phoenix. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. She filled out the forms with hands that shook slightly, handed them to the clerk, and sat down to wait. The clerk, a middle-aged woman with reading glasses on a chain, typed the information into her computer, frowned, typed again. The screen flickered, and a small red flag appeared. The clerk's expression shifted from routine boredom to puzzlement. "There's a flag here," she said, glancing up at Sarah. "Something's not matching up in the system. Can you wait just a moment?" Sarah nodded, unable to speak. She sat in the plastic chair and clenched her hands together. This was it. Whatever happened next would change everything. The clerk disappeared into a back office. 10 minutes passed. 15. When the door finally opened, 2 uniformed officers stepped out, followed by a woman in plain clothes who introduced herself as Detective Elena Morales. "Miss Whitaker," Detective Morales said carefully, "we need to ask you some questions. Would you mind coming with us?" While Sarah sat in a quiet interview room, Detective Morales was making urgent phone calls. The database flag had triggered an alert for a decades-old missing child case. Nebraska, 1969. She'd requested the old files be faxed from Nebraska State Patrol archives, and they'd started arriving page by page, building a picture of a little girl who'd vanished from a county fair 23 years earlier. Sarah told them about the newspaper clippings, about Ruth's control and isolation, about the homeschooling and the lack of medical records, about the story of parents who'd supposedly perished in an accident. She described the dreams she'd always had of a yellow house, dreams Ruth had always dismissed. "I think I might be Lily Harper," she finally said aloud, the words sounding surreal. "I think the woman I've called Aunt Ruth my whole life might have taken me." Detective Morales listened without judgment, taking careful notes. "We're going to need to take your fingerprints," she said gently, "officially for comparison. The preliminary database match is strong, but we need to be certain." They took Sarah's fingerprints right there in the interview room. While they waited for the lab results, Sarah sat in that chair, staring at nothing, feeling 23 years of one life colliding with 23 years of another. 2 completely different existences, both claiming to be real, and she was caught in the middle with no idea which version of herself was true. Less than 60 minutes later, Detective Morales returned. Her expression was careful, almost gentle, like she was handling something fragile. She sat down across from Sarah and looked her directly in the eyes. "Sarah," she said quietly. "Or should I say Lily? It's confirmed. The fingerprint match is definitive. You are Lily Harper, reported missing August 22, 1969, from Willow Creek, Nebraska. You were 6 years old at the time. Your biological parents are David and Margaret Harper. You have an older sister named Claire who has her own family now." The room seemed to shrink. Sarah felt tears come without warning, hot and silent, streaming down her face. "They're still alive," she whispered. "Yes," Detective Morales said softly. "Your mother still lives in Willow Creek. Your father lives nearby. Your sister has a family in Denver. And Lily, they never stopped hoping. Your mother has kept your childhood bedroom exactly the way you left it. For 23 years. Within 2 hours of the fingerprint confirmation, Phoenix police had drafted a search warrant for Ruth Whitaker's trailer. They moved fast, afraid she might somehow get wind of what was happening and disappear. Detective Morales had already contacted Nebraska State Patrol, who were preparing to notify the Harper family. Everything was happening at once. 23 years of waiting, compressed into a single afternoon of frantic activity. Ruth Whitaker's trailer sat in a modest mobile home park in Albuquerque, surrounded by chain-link fences and barking dogs. She was 71 years old now, gray-haired and frail-looking, nothing like what anyone pictured when they thought about someone capable of stealing a child. When Detective Morales knocked on the door and identified herself, Ruth opened it slowly. Her face showed resignation rather than surprise, as if she'd been waiting for this knock for 23 years. She found the box, Ruth said flatly. It wasn't a question. They arrested her right there, reading her rights while neighbors watched from their windows. Ruth didn't struggle or cry or try to run. She just stared at her trailer as they put her in the back of the police car. Her only words were quiet and delusional. I raised her right. She was safe with me. Better than where she came from. Inside the trailer, investigators found everything. The metal box, with all the newspaper clippings still inside. A forged birth certificate for Sarah Whitaker, dated 1970. Forged Social Security documents. And most damning, a handwritten notebook filled with Ruth's justifications page after page of her explaining to herself why what she'd done was right. God took my baby from me, one entry read. Then he took my husband. Left me alone. But he gives second chances. At that fair, I saw her. Curls like an angel. Laughing. Her mother wasn't watching. Careless. Didn't deserve such a gift. I prayed, and God answered. Take her. Save her. At 5:45 Nebraska time that same afternoon, Margaret Harper was sorting returned books at the Willow Creek Library when her supervisor touched her shoulder gently. Margaret, there's a phone call for you. Nebraska State Patrol. They said it's important. Margaret's first thought was David. Something had happened to David. Her hands went cold as she picked up the phone in the break room. The trooper's voice was carefully trained, professional but kind. Mrs. Harper, my name is Trooper Dennis Walsh. I need you to sit down. Margaret sat her heart, hammering so hard she could barely hear. Mrs. Harper, we have reason to believe we've located your daughter, Lily. She's alive. She's safe. She's in Arizona custody right now. The phone slipped from Margaret's hand and clattered on the floor. Her supervisor rushed in as Margaret's sobs came from somewhere deep, 23 years deep, shaking her entire body. My Lily, she kept saying. My Lily's alive. David received the news in person when Trooper Walsh drove to his house outside town. When David answered the door and saw the state trooper standing there, he immediately thought Margaret. Something had happened to Margaret. Mr. Harper, I have news about your daughter. David's face went white. They found a body. No, sir, the trooper said quickly. They found Lily, alive, in Arizona. David stood very still for a long moment, as if the words needed time to travel from his ears to his brain to somewhere he could understand them. Then he walked outside, sat down on his porch steps and cried for the first time in years. Not grief tears this time. Relief tears that shook him to his core. Claire was at work in Denver when the call came through. She almost didn't answer the unknown Nebraska number. The detective identified himself and asked her to sit down. When he told her, Claire went completely silent for several seconds. You're telling me, she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper, that my little sister, the one I thought was gone forever, is coming home. Yes, ma'am. And she's been asking about you, about all of you. 2 weeks passed between that identification and the reunion, 2 weeks of counseling and preparation on both sides. Doctor Maria Voss, a trauma specialist, worked with Lily to prepare her for what was coming. You may not remember them, Dr. Voss explained gently. And that's okay. That's completely normal after this long. What if they expect? The 6-year-old Lily asked, her voice small. I'm not her anymore. You don't have to be. Both lives are yours, Sarah's and Lily's. You don't have to erase one to claim the other. Margaret and David received similar counseling. She's been Sarah for 23 years, their counselor explained. She may not feel like Lily. Don't expect an instant connection. She's a stranger who's also your daughter. Let her set the pace. Claire flew in from Denver, carrying only one thing, a photo album she'd kept safe all these years, the one filled with pictures of 2 little girls who'd once been sisters. The reunion was arranged at a private conference center outside Lincoln Neutral Territory, away from media attention. The room was warm and quiet, filled with 23 years of silence that was about to break. Margaret arrived first, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. David came next, thinner than Lily might remember if she remembered anything at all. Claire waited with them, the photo album under her arm like a shield. When the door opened and Lily walked in, time seemed to stop. She was tall now, taller than Margaret. Her hair was dark, though auburn roots were showing as the old dye faded. She was 29 years old, a full-grown woman, but the freckles were still scattered across her nose, and when she smiled uncertainly, there was something in that expression that was achingly familiar. Margaret stood first. She crossed the distance in 3 quick steps and pulled Lily into her arms, holding on like she might vanish again if she let go. "My girl," Margaret whispered over and over. "My sweet girl." Lily stood frozen, at first her arms at her sides, overwhelmed. Then, slowly, uncertainly, her arms came up. She let herself be held. She didn't feel instant memory flooding back, but she felt something. Warmth. Safety. Something ancient and wordless that lived deeper than conscious thought. David approached next, moving carefully like he was approaching something that might shatter. He touched her cheek lightly. "I never stopped looking," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Never." Lily met his eyes and saw the truth there. "I believe you." Claire hung back, giving them space. When Lily finally turned to her, Claire opened the photo album to a specific page. 2 little girls on a porch swing, squinting in the summer sun. "You used to braid my hair," Claire said, smiling through tears. "Badly. Nothing but knots everywhere. But I let you anyway because you were so proud of yourself." Lily looked at the picture. She felt something, not quite a memory, but an echo of one. "I think I remember the swing," she said softly. Claire nodded, wiping her eyes. "That's enough for now." They sat together for hours that first day. Long silences stretched between bursts of careful conversation. Margaret cried so much she got the hiccups. David had to step outside twice to compose himself. Lily asked questions like she was interviewing friendly strangers. "What do you do for work now? Where do you live? What's Willow Creek like these days?" They asked careful questions in return. "Do you remember anything from before? What do you like to do? Are you okay? Have you been okay?" Someone brought in lunch, but no one ate much. They just sat in that room together, being in the same physical space for the first time in 23 years, trying to figure out how to be a family again, when they'd all become different people. At one point, Lily's voice cracked. "I'm sorry, I don't remember more. I feel like I should know you." "You were 6, Margaret said, reaching across to touch her hand. "None of this is your fault. What if I can't be Lily?" The question came out small and scared. "What if I'm only Sarah?" "Then be," both Claire said firmly. "Be whoever you are. We'll figure it out together." The reunion wasn't an ending. It was the hardest beginning any of them had ever faced. Ruth Whitaker's trial began that fall in Albuquerque. The charges were severe. Kidnapping, child abduction across state lines, identity fraud, false imprisonment, forgery. The evidence was overwhelming. On the 3rd day of the trial, Lily took the stand. She wore a simple gray sweater and kept her hands folded to stop them from shaking. Ruth sat at the defense table smaller than Lily remembered, her gray hair pulled back, eyes fixed on the floor. The prosecutor's questions were gentle, but thorough. Lily described her childhood with Ruth, the isolation and homeschooling, the constant warnings about the dangerous world outside, the forged documents, the lies about her parents being deceased. "Do you forgive her?" the prosecutor asked. Lily paused for a long moment, considering. "I don't hate her," she finally said, "but I can't forgive what she took. 23 years. A family. A name. My entire childhood. She gave me safety in her version of it, but it was built on lies. I needed to know who I really was." The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Guilty on all major counts. Ruth showed no reaction as the verdict was read. The judge sentenced her to 35 years in federal prison. At 71 years old, it was effectively a life sentence. "You robbed a family of 23 years, the judge said. "You robbed Lily Harper of her childhood. Your delusion does not justify this crime." When asked if she had anything to say, Ruth's answer was chilling in its complete lack of awareness. I loved her. I took care of her. That's all I have to say. Lily watched from the gallery as they led Ruth away. She felt something lift inside her, not completely, but enough to breathe a little deeper. Justice, even imperfect justice, mattered. The first months after the reunion were the hardest. Lily rented a small house near Margaret's place in Nebraska, trying to reconnect while maintaining her own space. Moving back into her childhood home felt impossible, too much like trying to become someone she'd never been. Margaret visited daily at first, bringing food and vanilla ice cream, cooking elaborate meals. It was too much, too fast, and eventually Margaret understood and backed off slightly. They started having quieter evenings together, just talking about ordinary things: books, weather, Claire's children. They didn't force memories, but when fragments came to Lily, she shared them quietly, and Margaret listened like each one was precious treasure. David took a different approach. He showed up often to fix things around Lily's house. A leaky faucet, a loose door handle, a squeaky hinge. He didn't push for emotional conversations or father-daughter bonding. He just showed up and was present, and gradually that was enough. Small conversations grew naturally over time. Stories about the feed store, days about pushing her on that swing until she squealed with delight. One day, Lily called him Dad without thinking about it. The word felt strange in her mouth at first, then gradually more right. Claire became the bridge between past and present. She brought her children to visit, and they didn't care about lost years or complicated histories. They just wanted to show Aunt Lily their treehouse and teach her their favorite video games. Watching them run around the yard, something loosened inside Lily. Family wasn't only about remembering what had been. It was also about creating new moments. Therapy with Dr. Voss continued twice weekly. Lily worked through layers of anger at Ruth, at the blank spaces in her memory, at time itself for what it had stolen. She grieved for the little girl who'd never gotten to grow up in Nebraska, and she grieved for the young woman who'd lived 23 years believing a complete lie. Dr. Voss helped her understand that both versions of herself deserved space and recognition. You're not choosing sides, the doctor explained. You're combining them into one whole person. In 1995, Lily legally changed her name to Lily Sarah Harper, keeping Sarah as her middle name. It was a quiet acknowledgement of those years, a way of saying both names were hers, both lives had happened, both mattered. She got a job at the Willow Creek Public Library, coming full circle to the place her mother had worked for decades. She shelved books and helped children find stories, finding peace in the quiet work. Sometimes she and Margaret worked the same shifts, maintaining a normal workplace relationship that slowly rebuilt the mother-daughter bond they'd lost. Memories continued returning in fragments over the years. The yellow house, Claire braiding her hair, Dad's deep laugh. Never full recall, never complete, but enough to feel connected to that other life, that other little girl she'd once been. In 1998, she met James, a quiet high school history teacher who volunteered at the library. He knew her story because everyone in town eventually knew, but he never treated her like a headline or a curiosity. They started with coffee, then walks, then longer conversations. He listened when she needed to talk about her past and stayed silent when she didn't, never pushing, never demanding more than she could give. They married in 2001 in a small backyard ceremony. Margaret walked her down the aisle, while David gave a toast that made everyone cry. Claire sobbed through the entire ceremony, overwhelmed with joy that her little sister had found happiness. Their daughter Emma was born in 2003. Holding her for the first time, Lily felt a fierce, protective love she hadn't known existed. She whispered promises into Emma's tiny ear. You will always know who you are. You will always be safe. No one will ever take that from you. Ruth Whitaker remained in federal prison in Texas, serving her sentence quietly. She kept to herself, read library books, and according to prison records, never expressed any remorse. She maintained her delusion until the end, convinced she'd done the right thing by taking Lily. In 2008, Ruth passed away from heart complications at age 87, 16 years into her 35-year sentence. Lily received the notification by mail, an official letter stating simply that Ruth Whitaker was deceased. She read it, folded the paper carefully, and set it aside. No funeral, no flowers, no mourning. just quiet closure. The years moved forward. Margaret retired from the library in 2005 and spent her time gardening and babysitting Emma, finally getting to be the grandmother she'd thought she'd never become. She told Emma stories that began when your mom was little, filling in the gaps with love and imagination. She still baked vanilla cakes every August 22nd, but now they were celebrations rather than vigils. David moved closer to town, wanting to be near family. He spent afternoons with Emma, teaching her to fish, showing her the patience and gentleness Lily barely remembered but somehow recognized. His health improved as his heart, broken for so long, finally began to mend. Claire's family visited often, and the Harpers weren't the same family they'd been in 1969. They couldn't be. Too much had changed, too much had been lost. But they were a family again, stronger in the broken places, bound together by survival and love that had endured the impossible. In 2010, Lily wrote a memoir called The Summer I Was Found. It wasn't sensational or exploitative. It was honest about loss and identity, and the slow, difficult work of healing. The book helped other survivors of long-term abduction feel less alone, and Lily donated much of the proceeds to organizations working on missing children cases. She began speaking at conferences when she felt able, working with law enforcement to improve database systems and Amber Alert protocols. She mentored families who were still waiting, offering the one thing she could give them: hope, based on her own impossible story. Margaret passed away peacefully in 2018 at age 88. She went knowing her daughter had come home, knowing her granddaughter was thriving, knowing that the miracle she'd prayed for every single night for 23 years had actually happened. David still lives near Lily, elderly now and in declining health, but finally at peace. Today, Lily is in her early 60s. She lives in a house with a big porch swing not far from Willow Creek. James is retired from teaching now, and they spend quiet days together. Lily still works part-time at the library because she loves books and helping people find stories. Emma is in college studying social work, choosing a career path influenced by her mother's remarkable journey. The Harper family story became more than just their own. The case is used in FBI training as an example of how cold cases can break years later with the right combination of persistence and technology. Lily testified before Congress about the importance of maintaining comprehensive fingerprint databases for missing children. Her case helped push for better interstate coordination in missing persons investigations. When asked what she wants people to learn from her story, Lily's answer is always the same: never give up. Systems matter. Databases matter. Taking fingerprints matters. Someone maintaining those records for 23 years mattered. My mother baking birthday cakes every year mattered. It all mattered. Every cold case file sitting in every basement archive represents a family still waiting, and those files deserve to be opened, reviewed, and remembered. Because Lily Harper came home not through dramatic detective work or brilliant deduction. She came home because a clerk typed information into a computer and a flag appeared on a screen. Sometimes salvation is exactly that simple. Sometimes it just takes 23 years to arrive. Sometimes it takes 23 years. Sometimes they come home not remembering who they were. Sometimes the reunion is complicated and awkward and painful. But they come home, and that has to be enough to keep hoping, keep searching, keep baking those birthday cakes for children who might never taste them until the year they finally miraculously do. Because somewhere tonight another family is waiting. Another mother is standing in a doorway whispering goodnight to an empty room. Another case file sits in a basement archive collecting dust. And maybe, just maybe, somewhere in the vast network of our connected world, a flag is about to pop up on a computer screen. And another impossible phone call is about to be made. And another family is about to learn that miracles, however long they take to arrive, are still possible. Don't let them stop looking. Don't let them stop hoping. Don't let the missing fade into forgotten history. Because every single one of them is someone's Lily, and every family deserves their miracle, even if it takes a lifetime to arrive.